Welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. In this series, we bring you sessions from the Emergency Services Show and the Emergency Tech Show 2025. In this episode, the first of three hosted by the British Safety Industry Federation, Natalie Wilson chairs a panel focused on inclusive PPE. With the starting point of the publication of a new standard, the panel explores the importance of fit for form. They highlight why correctly fitting PPE matters and share practical steps for both manufacturers and end users.
I'm really pleased to have an amazing panel with me. My name's Natalie Wilson. I'm the founder of Workwear Solutions. We provide technical support to end users to help them specify correctly and to do tender assessment for production for their styles. I'm going to hand over now to Sarah. Oh, sorry, before I forget, massive thing I shouldn't have forgotten. I am also heavily involved in standards, and I oversee the big reason why I'm here. I oversee all protective clothing standards on behalf of BSI, except for firefighting. And I also chaired the new inclusive PPE standard, which was released on Monday this week. So we're going to talk to you about that as well and how that can help. Sarah. Sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Gibbs. I'm a standards development manager for BSI. I
You did.
co-managed the committee for looking after BS 30417, and I look after Joint Technical Committee 23 and the working group underneath that, Working Group 6, which is also the inclusive PPE on a European level. There's an awful lot going on there, but we'll talk about that. Yeah. And then lovely Amy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Beams. I am an operational firefighter with 21 years experience in the fire and rescue service with a variety of different roles. And I'm currently one of the directors of Women in the Fire Service. So I'm here as that conduit between the end user and our lovely panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Jane. I am an international human rights lawyer. I am currently a research coordinator for SecurityWomen, which advocates for gender equality across the security sector. And I am also South African, so in case you notice a strange accent, you can catch me afterwards to discuss the rugby if you would like. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. So I think we should start off with kind of thinking about what inclusive PPE is. One of the big misconceptions with inclusive PPE, and the reason why people think it's quite difficult, is that there's a misconception that PPE means you've got one item of PPE that can fit everybody that you could possibly want to. And actually it's the opposite. One size doesn't fit all, it very rarely fits anybody actually. And so when we talk about the need for inclusive PPE, it involves the whole kind of process around understanding what that user's requirements are and not being driven by just what a particular supplier has on the shelf. So when we talk about inclusive PPE, for me, there are four distinct areas that need to be addressed as part of the ability to deliver inclusive PPE for a user. The first thing is education for the buyers and employers who perhaps aren't aware of all of the reasons why or the things that can be bought today that can help support an inclusive workforce. Events like this are really great for it, but there's also a lot of education that we've developed within the standard that we'll talk about to really help employers to understand what it is that they might need to do. The second area is thinking about supply chain. Obviously, a lot of suppliers in the room here, and the sort of big message to suppliers is you can no longer use cost as a reason why you don't provide something to fit a person properly. So I think you'll see as things go on over the next year or so, in particular off the back of the standard, is buyers demanding more from the supply chain in terms of what it is they need to be supplying them. The next stage that needs to be addressed, and it's a massive piece, is the actual testing methods and the standards and certification process itself. Sarah and I are involved, as she said, in Working Group 6, which is working at a European level to try to identify those standards and test methods that aren't fit for purpose in terms of inclusivity. And in perspective, the European Commission a couple of years ago identified 76 standards that are at high risk of causing injury to people because they are not inclusive. So, for example, and it's our favourite example, the test method for safety gloves, the smallest hand size, is too big for 86% of women's hands. So we've got a serious issue at that kind of standards level that we need to address, and that's something that we're working on. And then the final area is legislation, because ultimately, once the legislation becomes fit for purpose, hope you're all enjoying the background noise. I can't even hear myself, so... Hopefully you can still hear us. The last piece is legislation, because once it becomes mandated that has to happen, then we'll see that coming through more and more. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So I guess to start with then, Sarah, if we can talk about the new British standard that was released this week.
Yep.
And the development of it. It's a fantastic new start. It's the first standard globally that's been developed to look at inclusive PPE. So one of our first tasks was defining what inclusive PPE is, because it didn't exist as a definition before, but now it does.
And forever it will exist, I hope. Ideally, eventually, we don't actually even have to include the word inclusive, because it's just PPE that can be catered to everyone in the, without actually having to think about it that hard. But yes, BS 30417 started as an idea 3 years ago. Once I started at BSI, I had to fight tooth and nail to get it across the kind of understanding of why is it needed? Why are we not including it in standards anyway? And it was kind of the explanation of it behind it, and me having to... As a bit of a backstory, I used to work in a coal power station, and I used to work in construction. I have had some horror stories of wearing overalls that are meant for a 6'4" man. I didn't have the issue that most women have. I've got really large hands for a woman, so my gloves fit me, but I had a helmet that could swing around, and all these kind of things where I ended up wonder webbing my sleeves and cutting my trousers and falling up the stairs, because all of these kind of things were happening all the time, and it wasn't anything that anyone thought of because they didn't necessarily have that lived-in experience. I then joined BSI and was saying, okay, I don't get it. Why are these standards? Why are we just basing it on men? Why are we only testing one woman out of every 6 on a test subject? Why are we not considering about ethnic diversity? Why aren't we thinking about the smaller man and the larger woman and everything like that? And it's just, if you look at just our population anyway, we're not representing who we needed to do within standardization. So banging on the door quite a lot about it, and then eventually I got lovely Nat on board to be a chair. And she's regretted it ever since, because she's doing everything. And we kind of drafted together this kind of business case of, we really think this is really important. We really think this is an important subject we should be pushing on. We should be considering it. Affects so many different sectors. There's all manufacturing, construction, fire service, everything else that you can think of that people aren't even thinking about. And it's like, you want women on board, but you're not actually putting them in safe kit. Why? Why aren't you doing that? So we put together a skeleton document, got it through, got the business case through, got the committee on board, lovely Roshi and Sarah here as well, all writing and everything like that, contributing, making sure we had, and Alan, making sure that we had everyone on board of different sectors, giving the different input into it and everything like that. And it was such an immense journey, wasn't it? In that, so many different inputs, and we did it in 8 months, which is so fast for a standard to be done. I mean, usually a standard is, if you're lucky, 3 years. But it's been so needed and so absolutely needed, that we just had to get that on board. And I'm just so grateful for everyone being involved with it. It's been amazing.
And I think that's a really good point. The strength of the committee was that we had lots of different voices all together. So we had manufacturers, we had test houses, we had people who were involved in standards, we had users, and some of the lived experiences that we got from users was a major driver. And one of the key messages in the standard is just for everyone's understanding, it's not a technical standard. So it's not about telling you how to develop a product. What it is a guidance document to explain how you can better consider inclusivity within your organization, and how the culture of being able to review and engage with people is how you begin that journey of understanding whether or not what you've got is right. How do you test it? How do you specify it? All of those things coming together. One of the key things that we don't know, and this is a big problem at a European level, is what a modern workforce looks like. What does a diverse workforce look like? We don't have any up-to-date anthropometric data about what the workforce is. And there's some work that was done through PCIAW, some of the members there, to help support women in the fire service at your event recently, Amy, to try and start to tap into that piece of missing information. Did you want to talk about your
so we're when we're looking at trying to develop inclusive PPE, trying to understand different people's body shapes, it's not necessarily about being male or female. It's about the fact that everybody has a different body shape, and the generic firefighter uniform just doesn't really fit. Earlier this year, we did a survey out to all our members. So Women in the Fire Service is a not-for-profit organisation. We have membership throughout all the fire and rescue services in the UK, which means that we're that sort of point of contact for everybody to come into. So we've actually get quite a broad range and quite a wide reach into all the fire and rescue services so that we can start to understand what those issues are. We did a survey earlier this year before the PPE conference to say, well, what are the issues? And my initial expectation was that we were going to come back and maybe highlight 2 or 3 different pieces of PPE that we could then look to sort of develop onto. And the really interesting thing for me that came back was that not only have 97% of female firefighters had an issue with PPE, it was that there wasn't one single item that stood out. It was the entire range of PPE, from our firefighting tunics, RTC jackets, our workwear, our shoes, our helmets, and actually just this understanding that, you know what, that doesn't fit our current workforce. And actually, we need to be providing something better. So we worked with PCIAW earlier this year. Every year we have a development event at Moreton and Marsh at the Fire Service College. This year we had 230 delegates, and we ran a sizing exercise in collaboration with a couple of different organisations who came to do some standards, so testing out their equipment to see actually how does this work, what is this body size data. The last time we had any kind of fire service related anthropometric data was 2006, so it's really about time that we update that and actually look at what are the reflections of our current workforce. And I think sometimes there has always been a bit of a pushback that actually would women want to be sized, do women want to be measured, and the absolutely overarching thing was everybody was clambering to get measured to work out whether their fire kit actually fits. Now, this sort of raises 2 really interesting points for me, is that actually there is a willing amongst firefighters to say we desperately need something that fits, and we will do anything we can to help support the idea that we need to collect this data. But the other element was actually, do firefighters in general understand how their fire kit is supposed to fit? So actually we had a lot of women talking to us and we're like, oh no, I'm absolutely fine. And then they put their fire kit on and you go, oh, well, actually, you're not, because actually in the standard, what should fit, how your fire service, what your sleeves should do, what the overlap should do, how the items interface, there is a really lack of understanding on the floor, on the ground level, as to how that should happen. And actually, we have women that say, I'm fine, and they're not, and the women say, actually, this doesn't fit. And you think, well, if you understood the process behind it and why we need it to overlap in that way, then actually we can start to understand whether it's the correct fitting or not. But it's a really, really interesting conversation. I think one that's going to be going for quite a while yet, where we try and find some solutions to actually doing that. But I think that initial, that ground roots is collecting that data, and then we can use that data to effectively be able to work with manufacturers to actually understand what the sizing is and how we can move forward to create some really good workable garments.
One of the interesting things for me that came out of that was the stat that 20% of the women who were sized were too small for the smallest set of fire kit that's available on the market. And that's scary. That is a scary number of women who are wearing kit that's too big, which is not only a safety hazard in terms of trips and falls, but also in terms of thinking about the physiological effects of firefighting. And if you're in a structural fire, you're already getting too hot. So let's put extra weight on you with a product that doesn't fit you properly, that's going to agitate you. And when you get agitated, even when you're wearing everyday clothes, your body temperature rises. So there's a really serious issue that isn't always directly related. And we saw this quite extensively across the conversations that we had, of having to fight back and say, this is not a fashion show. I need this kit to fit me properly. And we were talking also about the kind of cultural idea of, is it okay to say something doesn't fit me? Like, what's the safe space for that? Because I think you've seen that as well, Amy, haven't you?
Yeah, so a lot of the experience from our members is actually, even when they are identifying items that don't fit, it's how do we then raise that, and what is the culture within the fire service to say, actually, as that minority group, how confident do you feel to raise the fact that your fire kit doesn't fit, or raise the fact that your boots don't fit, without having that sort of negative connotation of actually it's going to come back on you, or you're the problem maker, or how is that actually dealt with? And I think that, again, that's around education. That's around us educating services to say, do you know what? You might think you've got it right, but when you actually ask the people on the ground who are wearing it, what is their feedback? And I think we're all guilty sometimes of going, oh, we've got a problem, we fixed it, and then moving on to the next thing. And actually it's that understanding, that kind of circling back to go, what's the experience of that end user? What is that experience? And just because actually we've half resolved it doesn't mean that's okay and moving on. It's that actually every individual, it's vitally important that their PPE fits them. So we have massive advances in technologies around fabrics and technologies around processing. But if your fire kit doesn't fit, it doesn't matter how good your fabric is, it's going to let you down. So that fire kit has to fit. And we'll talk about fit for form. So it's not genderized. It's not about a female fit fire kit or a male fit fire kit. It's about talking about how we can create enough of the different possibilities in terms of size and fit to be available for everybody that needs that kit.
And that's, again, one of the themes that goes through the the provision of inclusive PPE standard, is you need to engage with people, engage with them in the first instance, understand what your workforce needs, and then understand what you're doing now, what's different, what needs to change. Have you always done the thing that you're doing? And are you sure that that's the right thing to be doing now? So it's asking those questions and creating that culture of engagement that's really important first step to understand what it is that you need. So Laura Jane, you are part of SecurityWomen, as you mentioned, and I know we've had some really interesting conversations, because this problem doesn't just apply in the fire service. There's also military situations that are problematic. Body armour is one of the worst kind of culprits, because we've looking at some research and a particular PhD thesis that was written by a lady in Texas State Uni. It's called Bras, Breasts and Bulletproof Vests, which is a great title for a piece, and really gets you talking. But they did research on security women who were police officers or soldiers, and they were finding that the body armor wasn't fitting them to the extent that they were getting injured from it. So they had people who were getting scarred on the bottom of their chin where they were sat in the car and the body armor was too tall for them, so sitting up. And the one that really worried me was when they were running. So when they had to operate, and when a police officer or soldier's running, there's a good reason for it. They were either having to hold on to their vest to stop them moving, which meant they were reducing their operability and their efficiencies, or they were tying their body armor so tight that they were struggling to breathe, but they could use both hands. So like, if you've got a soldier running into a situation, you want them to be able to breathe and you want them to be able to use their weapons and equipment, right? So this is really serious stuff. And that's kind of where you were talking before, Laura Jane, about like, why do we get to the point where we investigate this after the event and we're not using opportunities to investigate sooner? So
yeah, thank you so much for that. I think as a human rights lawyer, first and foremost, we often we start with the legal framework, and whether the legal framework is in fact able to address the issues of equality. And looking at it just from a security perspective, and if you just scale back a bit and just look at the how integral women are currently to the peacekeeping forces, military personnel, particularly in the policing sector. You've got around just over 61% of women currently in the police sector. Then you've got, in terms of our military personnel, you have around 11% who are in the who are in the regular services, and then you've got about 15% that are in the reserve services. Now this, in terms of military personnel, this might not seem like a great number, but in terms of the national, what we call the Women, Peace and Security, the United Kingdom has made a commitment to implement the UN, the United Nations Security Council 1325, which is a resolution that essentially focuses on the meaningful participation of women in the security sector, which also includes protecting the rights of women and girls, not only in deployment, but the women who are in fact deployed. So that's a really meaningful commitment. And one of the major commitments that falls under that National Action Plan is actually to reach 30% of women in armed forces by 2030. But now coming back to ill-fitting armor and the lack of protection because of that ill-fitting armor, we have to look at what is deterring women from actually entering the security sector, and also look at why it's important for women to participate and have meaningful participation. We look at other legal frameworks which is absolutely fantastic. Coming from South Africa, I think and having a bit of a global view. You look at the UK and the work that they've done in terms of the Equality Act and how that actually reinforces really mainstreaming gender equality in these specific sectors. And I think that's really, Natalie, I think where we need to start is looking at legislation such as the PPE in the Workplace Amendment Act of 2022, which looks at, in terms of Regulation 4.3, which looks at ergonomic requirements, and then also your the capability to fit and the adjustments that are need to be made in order to fit in order to ensure that there is adequate or that the uniform is correctly fitted.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
Now, those two, under that regulation, there is no specific mention of protected characteristics which are outlined in under the Equality Act of 2010. And this has become, I'm sure in practice, as Natalie has shared, that this has become a serious issue because there is nothing statutorily, legally obligating the buyers to, in fact, implement this at a practical level. And so we see that there's this disjoint between the practice and the legislation that we have in place. And I hope that I'll leave that there, but I hope that sort of gives a very broad perspective of how we've got these international legal frameworks, from CEDAW to the Beijing agenda, and UNSCR, but those are not legally binding, and we've got to create more legally binding legislation which can practically give effect to these rights.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. So the first point I'll pick up on is your comment about how we need to engage people to come and join industries where they predominantly may not have considered those industries before, and whether if I'm going to join the army, but I've got to wear a man's uniform, am I going to want to join the army? And how, as my body changes as a woman, how do I stay within that service or within that role if those things are changing? And one of the stats around I found really interesting, the Australian military recently announced that if they don't recruit more female soldiers, they will not have enough soldiers to operate their own army. So it's not just that the women who are in these services, in these roles, whatever industry you're working in, that you need to keep them there. But actually, we're at risk operationally as nations of not being able to deliver what we need to if we don't attract and retain more women into those industries. And the second thing is around the legislation, and you're absolutely right. That's my kind of the last little bubble on my flowchart as I think of it. And it is really important because, as Sarah sort of alluded to, one of the challenges we had when we were first talking about the inclusive PPE standard was saying, but PPE regulations already exist. Like, it says you have to fit adequately. But what does adequate mean? And if it was that good, we wouldn't be here having to write a standard on inclusive PPE. And again, the point where we don't have to say inclusive PPE and it is just PPE is like the utopia at the end of the yellow brick road that we're walking down at the moment. So yeah, it's really interesting. We have got some interest from MPs in terms of the standard, which is amazing to get that kind of support. So Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about how that's happened and what we hope that will result in?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit coincidental, to be honest with you. An MP by the name of Kirsteen Sullivan, who is Linlithgow and Bathgate MP, mentioned something about visiting Arco up in near Edinburgh, and she couldn't believe the issue about it, and she posted about it, and she spoke about it in the House of Commons, and I kind of said, by the way, do you know we're working on this standard? Are you interested in it by any chance? And it snowballed from there that we're now having a parliamentary launch for the standard. There's an awful lot of traction in that other MPs are suddenly picking up about it, and I almost committed career suicide because during a parliamentary roundtable, I kind of went, legislation, what's adequate? Can you tell me what's adequate? And from there, it's kind of, they're saying that they're going to have some backbench conversations about it. They're going to look at what they can do, but obviously it's the same kind of thing of standardization. It's going to take a long while, but discussions are starting to happen about it, which is...
Yeah, I think it's really, first of all, to point out, it's very, very rare to have a parliamentary support of a standard. Like, I haven't met anyone in standards yet who's aware of another one that's happened to. That's the first thing. The second thing is the conversation that we had at the MPs roundtable when we were talking about it. You could see the light bulb moments going off around them as they realised that this isn't just about, it's about PPE. It's not actually. It's about helping people return to work from long-term sick sooner. It's about the Disabilities Act. It's about equalities. It's about how are we encouraging equality of men and women? How are we doing gender equality? What are we doing? And there are so many different areas that PPE touches that people kind of don't consider when they think about this. And that's been really interesting, kind of eye-opening for them, I think.
It's about, I think they suddenly had this, we all know about their building ambition at the moment of building so many more houses and everything like that. And suddenly it was like, well, you can't provide a suitable hard hat, and it's not just about training, it's retaining people, it's having that kind of kit where you actually make people feel included in the first place. And we keep being accused of being woke and saying we're just doing this for women and blah, blah, blah. But it's actually, we're talking about everyone here. We're trying to make sure that everyone has well-fitting PPE that is keeping them safe. And to keep them safe and make them feel like they want to continue doing their job. They're not moving on because actually you disregarded my needs. You're not actually considering what I thought. I may not feel comfortable speaking up to you to say that there's an issue. And it's all these kind of things that we're just trying to empower the end user in actually thinking, okay, I know this is wrong. I can speak to such and such person and get it sorted. And all that kind of process, really.
And that is a huge part of it, is that engagement, as we've said, but also the standard is being made freely available thanks to a number of companies and organisations that have sponsored the standard to allow it to be made freely available. And that's because we don't want not having access to it to be a reason why you're not able to deliver it. And I think what it's also designed to do is give some of that empowerment to the user, because any single individual can download the standard. You don't have to be from an organisation, so that you can then understand what's reasonable for you to ask of your employer from an employer's point of view, understand what you might be asked, and that it, and then what you in turn need to speak to your supply chain about to make sure that they're doing it. It might also mean, as a buyer, that you need to think about your procurement process. So if you are going down a one-track route of only working with one supplier, how are you able to offer different RPE solutions, for example, if you've got someone who has a beard and can't wear a standard kind of RPE basic mask? Like, how do you do that? And that's not, that could be for a religious reason, could be for a personal reason that someone has a beard, but that shouldn't be a reason why someone has to either change something about their characteristic or something that would be religiously or culturally very difficult, impossible to do. But also, like, it's the right thing if we're engaging with people to stay within industries. And that's just one example. I also give the example of my father-in-law had prostate cancer a few years ago, and he had a stoma bag, and for him it was like debilitating. He found it really difficult. And I think if you were able to use, for example, when we make maternity wear, we put a stretch panel in the front. If we put a stretch panel in the side of a pair of trousers that allowed someone the dignity to return to work earlier in a way that they weren't worried about the stoma bag breaking, and if you're wearing high-vis yellow, like, everything will be visible. So it's thinking about, it's not just about women, it's about all kinds of things that don't take a huge amount of thought or additional cost for a real difference to be made to someone. I also remember when we had our we did a public consultation on the standard, and somebody from a fall arrest company said, well, you can't honestly expect us to have to make inclusive PPE. And I said, I absolutely do, because if you've got somebody who's an amputee, who wears a prosthetic leg, who is otherwise absolutely capable of working at height, and all you need to do is attach a clip to their existing fall arrest harness that prevents that or reduces the risk of that prosthetic falling, then yeah, I would count that as inclusive PPE. But what a simple solution, again, to allow somebody to be able to work. So I really think you can only do this when you start from the user. And one of the things that I was going to speak to you about, Amy, as well, is we've talked about, in terms of organisational cultures, asking some of the questions or thinking about, why is this set of regulations or set of dress code set as it is, and is it still relevant? So we talked about that with hair, for example.
Yeah, we did indeed. We talked about it with hair and with the helmet. So the firefighter's helmet has an adjustable cage within it, and obviously we can put them on. And we're asked time and time again when women come to join the fire service, it's like, what do I do with my hair? And it seems like a really simple question of, well, what do you do with your hair? Well, actually, the majority of women just scoop it up into the top of their helmet and pop the helmet on top. And it actually means that the helmet doesn't then fit properly. It causes separate pressure points in there. We've got so many women that say, actually, this has given me a cracking headache. I cannot wear this. I cannot work with this. And you kind of try and unpick it and look back a little bit. And some of our policies and procedures don't support the idea of being able to move forward really easily. So a lot of policies will say that the hairstyle has to be off the collar or it has to be under the helmet. And whilst we 100% appreciate there is a health and safety aspect there, it's actually what other innovations have been developed around that. So now we have fire hoods or flash hoods. So if you're going into an atmosphere where you need to be completely protected, you put a fabric fire hood on, and then you put your helmet on top. So there's absolutely no risk of your hair getting caught up. So why are we still insisting that it has to be absolutely off the collar? And we'll find that some services are sort of starting to adopt this and look at, actually, can we change that policy to be able to say, well, in certain circumstances, it needs to be off the collar. For a normal everyday, if you're just putting your helmet on or that you're not going into a fire scenario, you can have X, Y, and Z options, but it's about understanding it's not just the article itself or an individual. It's a much wider, broader discussion about how those policies and how those services support for different aspects and different elements of our PPE. I had an example when I first joined, and I had a helmet, and I got quite a lot of stick in training school for the fact that my hair used to stick out the bottom, and it wasn't particularly long, but you tied it in a little bobble and your bobble would fall out. And I spent the majority of my training experience worried about being told off that my hair was poking out from under my helmet than I was actually concentrating on what I was doing and learning that training environment. And it got to the point at about 10 weeks in, I cut all my hair off. So I actually proper chop, didn't have to stick it out anymore, and I'd sort of shoulder length hair. And we talk a lot now around culture and fire culture and being able to bring your whole self to work. How are we possibly having those discussions when people are having to fundamentally change their look for a piece of equipment that hasn't had that proper thought processing behind? And actually, for me, that was almost a game over scenario. Until we kind of worked out that actually that's fine, I'm all right, I can cut all my hair off, I can go and do this. But I shouldn't have had to do that to be able to have the career that I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good example, hair, of that's not just women who have long hair. It's not, it might be that a guy has long hair, or they might have dreadlocks or something else. And so actually, a simple change to a policy that is still safe, but actually is a bit more eyes open and considerate of the, I think is another really good example of a simple change that all works towards having a much more inclusive approach to what you're putting someone in and asking them to wear when they're in these really tough operational environments. Yeah. Fab. I think we'll go to the audience for some Q&A. Does anyone have any questions?
Question about I think I know your views on this, Natalie, but the procurement process you mentioned, be interested to get the panel's view, because to me it seems that a solution is there for good fitting uniform and PPE. PCIAW members, Rob at BOD Technology has a body scanner that can scan everyone's lumps and bumps, and the technology is there for manufacturing to produce made to measure products, much in the way that you'd go to a tailor to get a suit that fits you. The technology is there. What's wrong with the procurement process that means that we can't do that? Is the selection criteria skewed too much in terms of cost?
It could be that it's quite heavily cost orientated. I also think it's a case of education for buyers, because I think a lot of buyers don't know what else is available or how to approach that. I also think cost is an issue from a supplier point of view. We were talking about what are the different ways that you could kind of reduce the cost. So if you're making a male trouser where you've got 5,000 of them and you only need 1,000 female trousers, or 150 or whatever it is, if you run them through the production line directly after the male ones, you're not having to do all the changes of threads and the things that actually for a factory are the loss of productivity that causes the cost increases. So I think there's some of that. I think suppliers also need to start copying on to the fact that if you can't do 100% of what is required, you don't get the 80% that you want. You have to do all of it or you get none of it. And again, I think asking things, so like I know that you've been a bit involved in some of the recent fire tenders in terms of engagement of asking what's available. I think those conversations don't always happen. And I think buyers are going out to buy the thing that they've always bought because that's what they know. And if they haven't had feedback from the operational team or someone else to say there's a problem, then they'll continue to buy the same thing and not put those new ideas or those new innovations in place. Right.
Now, just to answer that question as well, from a procurement side of things, I'll talk to you. My restrictions as a procurement manager was actually in the stores as much as anything. It was don't put another SKU on the system. And if I actually worked that I could actually get a female with a proper fitting item, I was told keep it under wraps. Don't tell everybody or else everybody will want one. Now, things are changing, but that is a real issue. So when we were going to suppliers to say, what have you got available? It's like, well, what can you afford? And that's totally the wrong. So I think education, what's the retention? What's the cost of losing a member of staff because their uniform isn't fit for purpose, against actually buying that item in the first place? And I think it's the education piece for everybody, procurement and management as well.
You're absolutely right, and that is we'll go to Alan next. That's also why the standard is designed to be information for everyone within that buying process, from the end user to the employer through to the supplier as well. We will also touch on one of the other major issues in our next conversation, which is around specifications, because the quality of the specifications or the information in the specifications also has a big impact in the tender process. Alan, sorry to keep you waiting.
No, it was mainly an observation, to be honest. But first of all, congratulations to you, Sarah, Roshi, for the standard. But we've talked about culture a lot, and quite often the decision making, it has restrictions, right? But it can be health and safety professionals, it can be functional professionals, and it can be purchasing professionals that are involved. I think we should consider with the standard the engagement with HR and in order to drive that cultural change. I think personnel and human resources have to get this.
I agree completely. I also think it's a bit of a cultural issue depending on industry. So when it's quite male-dominated arena like I've gone into previously, I felt like I was so lucky because I was a woman working in it anyway that I was really privileged. And if I spoke up and said, by the way, can you get some special PPE for me? I would have been mocked. So it's kind of encouraging that culture within that environment as well, and educating all of your counterparts of this is really hilarious. So I've been working on this standard for 3 years now. My other half used to be in the police. He's 6'2", and he told me 6 weeks ago, oh yeah, my stab-proof vest was too short for me. And, you kind of go, right, do you not get what we've been working about? It's not just women here we're talking about. It's about everyone, fitting everyone to everything. And it was just kind of that light bulb moment to him of, we're talking about everyone here. And it was just kind of putting that across to him. And it was just kind of, what am I doing? What am I failing? What am I not communicating across here to make it obvious that we're talking about everybody, not just women, not just, everything like that. And it is very much, like you said, an educational piece across everyone, I think, and every sector.
I think that would be the shame of it if people look at it as that's about female PPE, because it's really not. It's about neurodiversity. It's about long-term changes from men and women who both go through a form of menopause. Men lose testosterone and their dexterity. So making changes in product to help a menopausal woman actually makes everyone's lives easier. And it's really about that holistic kind of, this is inclusive, we are making it better for everybody. And sometimes those small changes, whether they're cultural, whether they're in product, whether they're in the procurement process, actually have a massive impact positively for the whole workforce. I think that's really important.
I was going to add something else. Someone made the point earlier that it's matching the equalities and protected characteristics to keeping people safe, which is a great point. But my friend over there was talking about, 3D scanning of. There is also the challenge of bespoke PPE and where that sits within the regulation. I don't know if you.
Well, that's something that I think needs to be addressed through the standards process, because the ability to adapt outside of the standard size range that's tested. So, for example, where we've got this issue with the size of gloves being too big for most women's hands, if there was some anthropometric data that allowed manufacturers to say, this is what I can meet if I've got this size hand, but based on our metrics and what we've found, we think we need to go 40% smaller than that. What do I need to do to test it? And without the data, we don't know what we're supposed to be making to or certificating to. And so it's quite a difficult, it's like all of those things need to come together, because otherwise if we haven't got the data on what our workforces look like, then we need to do something. There is some work being done at a European level where I was trying to say the plan at the minute is a bit upsetting, I'll say it that way, but it makes me quite cross that they've not thought about this properly. They're going to take a Spanish representative profile and Spanish and Dutch representative profiles to create a European workforce general view? Well, you're taking a very typically slim population and a typically quite tall population and create a European monster that's somewhere between the earth everything and probably won't fit anyone again. And that's because they're trying to do a lot of work for like the built environment and machinery and things like that, where they're looking at like push pressures and things. Well, we don't need that necessarily for PPE. What we need to know is, what does the body look like from hands, feet, heads? What does that look like? And that's something that I think we could get a lot of data a lot faster through the sort of sizing tech companies, for us at least to be able to have, you know, a realistic view of what our populations look like, and whether that's done at firefighter level. So that's one of the things that I have suggested previously, is that we use those sizing technologies to understand what a workforce looks like, to build patterns and specifications from that particular workforce. Because you might find that nurses don't have the same body profile as police officers, or that firefighters don't have the same body profile as a construction worker. So we need to understand what body type we're looking at and which sector they come from, to make the PPE that's very specifically designed for those sectors to be fit and inclusive for them too. Thank you all so much for joining us for this presentation. Thank you to the lovely panel and for the questions.
Thanks for listening. Remember that by taking time to learn from our speakers, you can earn CPD points from our partner CPDme. So do check out the link in the show notes. Our thanks to MSA Safety for their continued support for our podcast, and to Smart Digital for producing this series. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.